The sun rose over the sprawling military training grounds, casting long shadows across the gravel and metal structures. The air buzzed with the sound of boots hitting pavement, whistles shrill and commanding, and the murmur of recruits trying to steady their nerves. Among them was Private James Miller, a young man with a swagger that seemed bigger than his experience. His uniform was immaculate, his chest out, his jaw set in a stubborn line of defiance. He liked to think of himself as someone destined for recognition, someone who would rise quickly through the ranks. But the truth was, he was loud, reckless, and full of assumptions. Across the yard, Sergeant Riley moved with a sort of quiet confidence that demanded attention without shouting. Her uniform fit perfectly, though faint scars traced her skin along her arms and collarbone silent, reminders of battles that most recruits could barely imagine. She executed each drill with precision, her movements fluid and exact, as if her body remembered a rhythm no one else could perceive. The sun caught the scars, glinting off the pale lines of healed wounds, and Miller noticed them immediately. Not with curiosity, but with a sneer. "Look at her," he said, loud enough for the group around him to hear, his voice dripping with mockery. "Bet she lost a fight with life itself. How'd that happen? Did she trip over her own 2 feet, or fall out of a window?" A few recruits chuckled nervously. Some, uncertain, laughed to avoid being the next target of his attention. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the cruelty. Riley didn't respond. She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his briefly, calm and unshakable, before returning to her drills. It was a glance that could freeze fire, and Miller, caught off guard, felt a twinge of irritation. He didn't like being ignored. He thrived on confrontation, on feeling the upper hand. So he leaned a little closer, lowering his voice so only a few could hear. "Those scars. They make her look weak. Bet she cries at every little setback, too." Laughter followed, uneven and awkward, because no one really wanted to encourage him, but feared the alternative. Riley continued her routine, unaffected. Each precise motion she made seemed to mock the crude arrogance Miller displayed without even trying. Despite the noise and heat of the yard, a strange stillness surrounded her. Recruits began noticing the rhythm, the efficiency, the power behind her movements. Miller, however, could only see the surface scars, skin, and what he thought was weakness. He had no idea what lay beneath, no inkling of the battles fought or the lives saved. To him, Riley's silence was a challenge, and in his mind, he had to meet challenges with ridicule, dominance, and noise. The morning drills dragged on, each exercise harsher than the last. Running laps under the unforgiving sun, doing push-ups until arms shook violently, carrying heavy packs across uneven terrain. This was supposed to be a test of endurance, but it became a stage for Miller to demonstrate superiority. He shouted over others, mocked mistakes, and made a show of completing each task with exaggerated effort. Every grunt, every strained movement was a performance designed to draw attention away from his lack of experience. Meanwhile, Riley moved with the same quiet determination she had from the beginning. She didn't compete for attention, didn't correct anyone but herself. She simply focused on the task, each motion sharp and precise, her breathing controlled, her pace unwavering. Recruits who were exhausted and shaking tried to keep up, but it was obvious that she was in a league of her own. Some whispered to each other, marveling at her discipline, the way she seemed untouchable, even under the sun's merciless glare and the weight of heavy packs. Miller noticed these whispers, and, irritated that attention wasn't solely on him, stepped it up. He leaned forward during a rest period, pointing at Riley's scars with a smirk. "Hey, everyone, maybe we should give her a medal for losing a fight with a coffee table or a door," he jeered. The laughter that followed was uneasy, fragmented, because the other recruits sensed the wrongness in his behavior. Riley looked up from her water bottle, her eyes steady, unyielding, but still calm. Not a single word passed her lips. This silence unnerved Miller more than any verbal reprimand could have. He had expected outrage, embarrassment, anger, any reaction that would give him fuel to continue. Instead, he faced composure so absolute that it was almost intimidating. Her calmness made him shift uncomfortably in his boots. He tried again, louder this time, mimicking her movements, mocking her drills. But the effect backfired. Other recruits began to notice his insecurity creeping through the bravado. Whispers grew, questioning the man who had seemed so dominant. Miller didn't notice. His mind was too focused on trying to break her, on proving he was stronger, faster, better. Hours passed. By noon, the sun had climbed high, baking the gravel and metal beneath the recruits' boots. Sweat-soaked uniforms clung to bodies, muscles ached, and breathing came in short, desperate bursts. Yet Riley's movements never faltered. Each action was executed with fluidity and precision. Every command she obeyed or performed a demonstration of control over herself and her environment. Miller, panting and flushed, finally realized something he hadn't before. Her scars didn't signify weakness. They were proof of survival, proof of experience he couldn't begin to understand. Still, he refused to admit it. His pride held tight, a stubborn barrier to insight. But those around him, observing quietly, were beginning to understand. Riley's strength wasn't loud. It wasn't about winning attention or proving herself to anyone. It was in endurance, in discipline, in doing the impossible while under fire literally and figuratively. And somewhere beneath his bravado, Miller felt the first crack of doubt. By the time the morning drills concluded, the recruits were exhausted, some staggering under the weight of packs and heat. Miller, however, carried a sense of unresolved tension. He had spent the entire morning trying to mock, dominate, and belittle, only to find himself quietly outclassed. Riley walked past him, water bottle in hand, shoulders straight, head high. Her scars glinted in the sunlight, silent testimony to battles fought, to courage earned, to lives touched. And Miller, for the first time that day, felt a shiver of fear mixed with reluctant admiration. As the sun climbed higher and shadows shortened, Sergeant Riley stood near the edge of the training yard, scanning the recruits without a word. She didn't chastise Miller. She didn't call out the laughter or whispers. She simply moved, fluid and untouchable, a force of nature in uniform. And though Miller wouldn't admit it to anyone, least of all himself, something had shifted. The arrogance, the mocking, the need to dominate, it all felt suddenly hollow in the presence of someone who had truly survived fire and come back stronger. The day was far from over. General Thompson, the camp's strict overseer, was scheduled to arrive soon. And even as the recruits tried to catch their breath, some sensing that a storm of authority was approaching, others still mocking quietly among themselves, the tension thickened. Riley, scars visible, unbowed, unshaken, continued her quiet routine. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone commanded respect, a silent reminder that true strength often doesn't roar, it endures. By the time the morning briefing began, it was clear to every recruit that something monumental was about to unfold. And Miller, who had spent hours ridiculing her scars, laughing at what he thought were signs of weakness, finally sensed that the world around him had shifted. Riley's calm wasn't passive. It was purposeful. And the coming revelation, one that would shake every assumption he held, was just around the corner. Even as the morning drills ended, the tension lingered like smoke over the training yard. Recruits slumped against walls and benches, catching their breath, their uniforms soaked with sweat. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, heating the gravel beneath their boots. Private Miller still felt the sting of being outclassed. the unexpected unease of having someone remain completely unaffected by his mockery. He watched Sergeant Riley move through the group, checking equipment, straightening uniforms, offering terse nods of acknowledgement. There was no warmth, no words of encouragement, but there was an unmistakable command in the way she carried herself. Every recruit instinctively straightened, sensing her authority even without formal rank in that moment. Miller's frustration grew. How could someone with scars, someone broken, command such silent respect? He muttered under his breath, but the others heard enough to quiet their conversations. Some cast glances at Riley, their curiosity piqued by the quiet power she radiated. Others shot Miller worried looks, sensing his misjudgment. The irony was that in trying to assert dominance, he only revealed his ignorance. Riley's scars weren't marks of weakness. They were evidence of survival, endurance, and courage. But Miller, stubborn and prideful, refused to see it. "Move it. Forward march." Riley's voice finally cut through the murmurs. It was soft, almost conversational, yet everyone obeyed instantly. The recruits lined up, carrying their packs and gear as instructed. Today, the obstacle course awaited, a grueling sequence of walls, rope climbs, and mud-filled trenches. Rumors had spread about the course. Only the strongest, fastest, and most determined made it without collapsing. Riley had already completed it multiple times before, yet she never flaunted her accomplishments. Her calm approach unnerved Miller, who had expected her to falter under pressure, or at least complain. The whistle blew, signaling the start. Miller surged forward, his movements exaggerated and loud, drawing attention to himself. He shouted over others, mocking their pace, calling out mistakes, confident he would finish first. Riley, meanwhile, advanced steadily, her movements deliberate, each footstep calculated, each pull on ropes precise. She didn't rush, didn't show strain, even as her scars glimmered with sweat under the sun. The course was designed to test every aspect of a soldier's strength, agility, endurance, and mental focus, and Riley's every action reflected experience that no textbook could teach. As the recruits struggled, Miller noticed something strange. Despite his mocking, Riley seemed untouchable, unaffected by fatigue. When a recruit faltered, she offered a quick helping hand or adjusted gear silently, never speaking, never drawing attention to herself. Miller's frustration turned to disbelief. How could someone injured, scarred, still maintain this level of composure and skill? He had trained hard, studied manuals, followed instructions, yet he was struggling while Riley seemed to glide through each obstacle. The irony was brutal and inescapable. The very person he ridiculed was outperforming him effortlessly. The mud pit loomed next, a churning pit of thick, heavy sludge. Miller charged in with gusto, splashing violently, trying to make a show of his effort. Riley approached calmly, assessed the depth and consistency, and moved through with measured steps. Her body dipped and rose fluidly, her movements almost dance-like, and she emerged nearly clean compared to the others, who were bogged down, struggling for every step. The recruits whispered, impressed despite themselves. Miller's face flushed with embarrassment. He had intended to assert dominance, yet every action he took only highlighted his inferiority. By the time they reached the rope climb, the heat was oppressive, and exhaustion clung to every muscle. Miller's confidence faltered, sweat stinging his eyes, heart hammering in his chest. Riley, scarred and stoic, began her ascent, each pull precise, each movement effortless in appearance. The recruits held their breath, sensing something extraordinary. Miller's voice, once loud and mocking, fell silent. He couldn't shout past the physical strain, couldn't claim superiority when reality spoke so loudly. Riley's presence demanded respect, not with words, but with performance and quiet authority. Every second of delay, every strained breath from the others, underscored her mastery. At the top of the rope, Riley paused for a moment, scanning the yard with calm, analytical eyes. She didn't gloat, didn't call attention to herself. Her scars were visible in the sunlight, telling stories no one dared ask about. Miller, standing below, finally felt a creeping sense of humility. He realized that what he thought of as weakness, her visible injuries, was actually strength. Her endurance, her control, and her silence were proof of battles fought, lives saved, and challenges overcome that he could barely imagine. The realization gnawed at him, uncomfortable and unwelcome. When the general's vehicle arrived, the sudden rumble of the engine and the crisp authority in the air shifted the energy instantly. General Thompson was known for his strict standards, unwavering expectations, and piercing gaze. Recruits snapped to attention, dusting off uniforms, standing straighter, their nerves taut. Miller's attempts at bravado faltered further as the general's eyes swept the yard. And then they landed on Riley. Thompson paused, lingering, a subtle but significant recognition flashing across his face. The other recruits noticed, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out why the general's attention seemed unusually focused. Miller, still proud in his ignorance, had no idea what was coming. The general's voice cut through the air. Recruits! Today's evaluation is not only about physical skill, but discipline, judgment, and respect. Observe carefully. He walked along the line, scrutinizing each recruit. When he reached Riley, he stopped. Sergeant, he said, voice low but commanding. Step forward. Riley obeyed immediately, moving with precision, her expression unreadable. The other recruits held their breath. Miller tried to mask his unease with a forced smirk, but the weight of authority, history, and respect around Riley was impossible to ignore. Something told him that mocking her would soon have consequences far beyond embarrassment. Riley's presence under the general's scrutiny transformed the yard. She didn't speak, yet every movement was deliberate, commanding, and respectful. The general's eyes, sharp and discerning, lingered on her scars, not as marks of weakness, but as symbols of experience and sacrifice. The other recruits began to understand that she had a history they could only guess at. Miller's pride wavered, the first cracks forming in his arrogance. He had mocked what he didn't understand, and now the lesson was about to begin in full. By the end of the afternoon drills, every recruit exhausted, muddy, humbled recognized the truth. Riley's scars were not a liability. They were proof of survival and courage under fire, a silent testament to battles won and lives saved. Miller's face burned with shame, though he couldn't yet articulate the lesson. The general, still observing, nodded once in quiet acknowledgement of Riley's professionalism, endurance, and leadership. And in that silent nod, the seeds of respect and a reckoning for Miller were planted, setting the stage for the revelations and transformations yet to come. The morning sun blazed relentlessly over the training yard, but the arrival of General Thompson changed the atmosphere instantly. His presence was a physical weight, commanding the attention of every recruit and officer alike. The gravel seemed to shift beneath his boots as he walked, his sharp gaze scanning the lines with precision. Recruits snapped to attention, their nerves taut, every bead of sweat on their brows accentuated by the pressure of scrutiny. Even Miller, whose pride had barely survived the morning drills, felt the unrelenting authority pressing down on him. General Thompson's eyes paused on Sergeant Riley, a faint but unmistakable flicker of recognition passing through his otherwise stoic expression. He stopped just long enough for the surrounding recruits to notice, though no one dared speak. Riley, scarred but unwavering, stood at attention, her eyes level with the general's, unflinching and precise. Every muscle in her body was controlled, yet the sheer aura of experience radiating from her made it clear she was no ordinary soldier. Miller, still clinging to his arrogance, tried to read the expression on Thompson's face, but quickly realized it was futile. "Recruits," General Thompson began, his voice gravelly and deliberate. "Today is more than just physical tests. It is a lesson in discipline, judgment, and respect. Pay attention." His gaze swept the line, lingering briefly on Miller, whose smirk faltered under the general's intense scrutiny. Miller's confidence, already shaken by Riley's performance earlier, faltered further. He had thought mockery could assert dominance. Now it only revealed ignorance. The general's piercing stare carried weight, as if he could see through every lie, every half-truth, and every unearned pride. "Sergeant Riley," Thompson said, lowering his voice slightly, "step forward." Riley obeyed without hesitation, moving with fluid precision, her boots striking the gravel softly but deliberately. She was calm, collected, and utterly in control. The general studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then addressed the group. "You see these scars?" His hand swept toward Riley, pointing to the pale, faded lines that traced her skin. "You think they are marks of weakness. You are wrong." A hush fell over the recruits. Even Miller, who had spent hours mocking Riley, felt the air thicken around him. "The scars you see," Thompson continued, "are proof of courage, endurance, and sacrifice. They tell stories that words cannot capture. They are the visible remnants of actions most of you cannot imagine, challenges most of you would flee from. Sergeant Riley has faced combat situations that tested the limits of human strength, judgment, and willpower. And she survived, rising again each time, stronger and wiser." The words hit Miller like a physical blow. His smirk disappeared, replaced by a growing sense of shame and confusion. Murmurs began to ripple among the recruits. They had suspected Riley was skilled, perhaps even exceptional, but the general's words gave context to what they had witnessed. The calm precision, the endurance, the silent leadership. It was no longer mere talent or discipline. It was forged in fire, in experiences they could barely imagine. The general paused, letting the weight of his statement settle. Miller's mind raced, struggling to reconcile what he had mocked with what he was now being told. Every ounce of his previous arrogance seemed hollow. "Her call sign," Thompson said, his voice cutting through the quiet, "is Phoenix." The single word hung in the air, electric and heavy with meaning. The recruits exchanged glances, whispers passing like lightning. Miller's jaw tightened. He had never expected a revelation like this. "Phoenix," the general continued, "earned her name after a mission in Kandahar, where an explosion trapped her unit in a burning Humvee. Despite severe injuries, she pulled 3 of her comrades to safety before evacuation. Her courage saved lives. Her scars are not weakness, they are survival and heroism." A wave of silence washed over the yard. Even the most restless recruits seemed to realize the magnitude of what had been revealed. Riley remained composed, her posture perfect, her gaze unwavering. She did not speak. She did not gloat. She had never needed to. The story of Phoenix was in her actions, etched into her skin, and now validated by one of the most respected figures in the military. Miller, for the first time that morning, felt the full weight of his ignorance. He had thought he understood strength. He had thought mockery could demonstrate superiority. But strength, he realized, was not in loud words, not in shallow bravado. It was in endurance under impossible conditions, in quiet courage, in unwavering discipline when everything was against you. And Riley embodied it all. The realization gnawed at him, uncomfortable and humbling. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but words caught in his throat. How could he convey shame in the face of genuine heroism? How could he reconcile his arrogance with the truth now displayed so starkly before him? The other recruits looked on, some with awe, some with quiet admiration, and some with silent envy. They had been tested not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. The presence of Phoenix Riley had shifted the entire yard's dynamic. The lesson was clear. Survival, courage, and honor were not measured in words or superficial appearances, but in actions and sacrifices, and in the scars left behind. Miller's previous ridicule felt almost obscene in the light of truth. General Thompson's gaze swept over the group one last time. "Learn this well," he said. "Leadership, respect, and courage cannot be faked. They are earned through endurance, resilience, and the willingness to rise from fire. Sergeant Riley's example is one you would do well to study. And Private Miller," he added, his voice low but firm, "perhaps you will take a moment to reflect on what you have learned today." The words landed with gravity. Miller's shoulders slumped slightly. His usual arrogance felt misplaced, almost ridiculous. Riley's calm presence did not falter, even as all eyes lingered on her. She remained stoic, composed, a living testament to strength, forged in fire and adversity. She had no need for praise, no need for acknowledgement. Her call sign, Phoenix, had always spoken louder than any words ever could. The recruits, Miller included, now understood that mockery, arrogance, and surface-level confidence could never match genuine courage. The yard itself seemed quieter, as though even the environment recognized the lesson being imparted. As the general departed, the recruits were left in a profound hush. Riley turned, her eyes scanning the yard once more, and then she resumed her duties. The murmurs among recruits began to grow, but this time with respect, curiosity, and reverence. Miller's face burned with the realization that his mockery had been misplaced. He had seen weakness where there was none, had judged courage by appearances alone, and now faced the uncomfortable truth. The story of Phoenix, revealed in part by the general, had left an indelible impression on everyone present. By the end of the day, the lesson lingered far beyond the physical exhaustion. The image of Riley moving calmly through the yard, scars visible and unbowed, became etched into the minds of every recruit. Miller, still grappling with his embarrassment and newfound respect, began the slow process of internal reckoning. He had been confronted with the reality that true strength, heroism, and leadership were measured not by arrogance, noise, or mockery, but by endurance, courage, and the ability to rise again after fire. Phoenix was more than a call sign, it was a legacy. The air in the training yard still carried the weight of General Thompson's revelation. The recruits, exhausted from the morning's grueling drills, now walked with a newfound reverence for Sergeant Riley. Her call sign, Phoenix, reverberated in their minds like a quiet echo of triumph, courage, and sacrifice. Even the sun seemed hotter, the dust more oppressive, yet Riley moved through the yard as if untouched, her every step deliberate, precise, commanding respect without a single word. Miller, however, was lost in his own thoughts. The pride and arrogance that had carried him through the morning drills had crumbled under the revelation. His mind replayed every insult he had thrown at Riley, every mocking gesture, and every snide comment. The deeper he reflected, the heavier the weight on his chest. He had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, not only in judging Riley, but in underestimating the breadth of human strength and resilience. Each scar she bore was a story he couldn't begin to comprehend, and each action she took reflected experience he could only dream of attaining. The obstacle course stretched ahead of the recruits like a gauntlet of challenge and endurance. Muddy trenches, rope climbs, walls of varying heights, and balance beams awaited, each one designed to push the limits of body and mind. The general had departed, leaving Sergeant Riley and the training officers in command, but the aura of authority lingered. Every recruit sensed that what they had witnessed this morning would influence how they performed in the hours to come. No one wanted to embarrass themselves further, least of all Miller. Miller attempted to mask his unease with forced bravado, striding toward the first obstacle with exaggerated confidence. He shouted instructions at himself and others, trying to reclaim some sense of dominance, some shred of control. But Riley's calm presence was magnetic, drawing the attention and respect of every recruit without effort. She moved forward with precision, analyzing each obstacle with the clarity of someone who had seen it all before. Miller, in contrast, rushed recklessly, his pride blinding him to the subtle cues Riley seemed to perceive instinctively. The first challenge, a wall climb, seemed straightforward at first. Miller surged forward, swinging and pulling with brute force, trying to make a show of his effort. His movements were loud, exaggerated, drawing attention as he had intended. But halfway up, his grip slipped, and he almost fell backward into the mud below. A ripple of laughter passed through the recruits, though Riley's face remained impassive. She approached the wall with calculated patience, assessing the handholds and footholds before moving. Every movement was efficient, precise, a perfect balance of power and control. Within moments, she scaled the wall gracefully, landing softly on the other side. Miller's frustration grew with each obstacle. He shouted over the rope climbs, called out to recruits below, and tried to assert dominance by mocking slower climbers. "Keep up," he barked, though his voice cracked under exhaustion. Riley, however, continued with a quiet dignity. She offered subtle corrections when recruits struggled, a guiding hand here, a repositioning of gear there, never calling attention to herself, never praising, never scolding. She simply ensured that the unit moved efficiently, her leadership a silent but powerful force. The contrast between her composure and Miller's chaotic energy could not have been starker. By the time the recruits reached the mud pit, the sun was at its zenith, and heat radiated off the gravel. Miller lunged forward recklessly, splashing mud over himself and others in an attempt to prove vitality. Riley assessed the depth and consistency, calculating each step before entering. Her body moved fluidly, emerging almost clean compared to the recruits struggling behind her. Observers whispered in awe. Miller's face flushed with frustration and humiliation. Every attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, highlighting the stark difference between showy strength and real endurance. The rope climb loomed next, a test of both strength and mental focus. Miller approached it with loud determination, but fatigue and frustration began to set in. Each pull taxed his muscles, and his movements were jerky and uncoordinated. Riley, in contrast, began her ascent with deliberate, smooth motions. Every pull of her arms, every adjustment of her legs, seemed effortless. Yet she climbed with precise control and measured breathing. The recruits watched, collectively holding their breath. Riley's scars glinted faintly under the sunlight, testament to battles fought and survived, her endurance a living example of courage in action. Halfway up, Riley paused, scanning the yard. Her eyes were calm and analytical, taking in the positions and struggles of every recruit. She did not gloat. She did not demand recognition. Her presence was a silent testament to experience and mastery. Miller, below, felt a pang of self-consciousness. His usual arrogance faltered as he realized the futility of comparison. Riley's strength was not performative, not loud or boastful. It was precise, quiet, enduring, and infinitely more powerful than any superficial display of bravado. The realization struck him like a blow he could not deflect. When she reached the top, Riley paused briefly, then descended with equal control, landing softly among the recruits. Miller's attempts to match her failed spectacularly. He stumbled on the rope, barely avoiding a fall into the mud. The whispers among the recruits grew, admiration clear in every voice. Riley, scarred, composed, and stoic, had set a new standard. Miller's shame deepened, though he refused to admit it out loud. For the first time, he realized that true strength was invisible to those who only measured it by appearance or noise. The remaining obstacles, balance beams, crawling trenches, and heavy pack runs were completed with Riley guiding silently. She adjusted a recruit's posture here, steadied another's balance there, her movements subtle yet powerful. Her scars, once mocked, now symbolized resilience. The recruits moved differently under her influence, inspired not by intimidation or threat, but by the quiet example she set. Miller's pride cracked further with each passing obstacle. He had mocked courage, judged scars as weakness, and belittled experience. Now, in the presence of Phoenix, he could see the magnitude of his errors. By the end of the obstacle course, fatigue and mud covered the recruits. Miller's chest heaved, his arms trembled, and his confidence had been dismantled piece by piece. Riley, meanwhile, emerged composed, her movements precise, her scars visible, yet her strength undeniable. The yard was silent, except for heavy breathing and the faint whispers of awe. Every recruit recognized that they had been tested not only physically, but mentally and morally. They had witnessed the embodiment of courage, endurance, and leadership in action, and even Miller had no choice but to acknowledge it internally. That evening, as the recruits regrouped near the barracks, the air was thick with reflection. Miller, exhausted and humbled, trailed behind, watching Riley move with quiet authority. He replayed the morning's events in his mind, the obstacle course, the mud, the rope climbs, and above all, the silent power of Phoenix. He had thought he understood strength, yet every assumption had been shattered. His mockery, arrogance, and superficial pride now seemed childish and foolish. Riley's scars were not a limitation. They were proof of survival, resilience, and heroism. By sunset, a new dynamic had settled in the camp. Recruits spoke quietly among themselves, sharing their awe and respect for Riley's example. Miller, still grappling with the sting of his earlier arrogance, found himself silently inspired. The lesson was clear. Leadership, courage, and strength were measured not by noise, mockery, or superficial displays, but by endurance, sacrifice, and the ability to rise from fire. Phoenix had proven that day that true heroes did not seek recognition. They earned it through actions and lived by example. The evening air was thick with the smell of sweat, mud, and dust. The recruits, exhausted from the obstacle course, gathered in the yard, trying to catch their breath. Some leaned against walls, others sat on benches, their movements slow and deliberate, reflecting both physical fatigue and the mental weight of the day. The general's words from that morning lingered, echoing in their minds. Sergeant Riley stood near the edge of the yard, composed and unflinching, her scars visible in the dimming sunlight, a quiet reminder of battles fought and survived. Even now, the weight of her presence was palpable. Miller lingered behind, his pride eroded, but his mind still wrestling with disbelief. He had mocked Riley relentlessly, derided her scars, and tried to assert dominance in front of the recruits. Yet every action he had taken backfired. Every demonstration of strength or skill he attempted was overshadowed by Riley's calm precision and authority. He had expected her to falter, to show weakness, to give him some opening to assert himself. Instead, she had remained untouchable, guiding, correcting, and outperforming him at every turn. The gnawing shame of his earlier arrogance was impossible to ignore. The murmurs among the recruits grew quieter, replaced by an almost reverent silence. They spoke in low voices about Riley, her scars, her precision, and her endurance. The morning's revelation of her call sign Phoenix hung heavily in the air, transforming every perception. Miller, attempting to distract himself, tried to reassert some sense of normalcy, but his attempts at humor and casual conversation fell flat. The weight of truth, the realization of his own ignorance, and the undeniable evidence of Riley's strength pressed down on him. He could no longer pretend superiority. It had been stripped away, layer by layer. General Thompson, observing the group from a distance, remained quiet. His eyes followed Riley's every movement, recognizing something extraordinary in her presence. Then, finally, he stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel, cutting through the murmurs of the exhausted recruits. "Recruits," he said, his voice steady, commanding, and unyielding. "You have witnessed strength today. You have witnessed endurance. But now, I want you to understand the true meaning of courage. Sergeant Riley's scars and her call sign are not mere symbols. They are proof of heroism under fire." He paused, letting the words sink in. Every recruit, Miller included, leaned in, senses heightened, ready for the revelation. Some of you may know Riley's history only through rumors. Others may have assumed her scars were accidental or unremarkable. You were wrong. Every mark on her body has a story. Every scar is a reminder of lives saved, decisions made under fire, and courage that few can comprehend. Today, you have seen her skill, discipline, and precision. But now, you will understand why she earned the call sign, Phoenix. Miller felt his stomach tighten. He had imagined countless heroic scenarios in his mind, but had never anticipated the reality. His arrogance had blinded him to the truth. The general's voice carried weight, and every word seemed to press directly against Miller's chest. He tried to speak, perhaps to apologize, but no words came. Riley remained calm, composed, her eyes unwavering, silently commanding the attention of every recruit. Her silence was not passive. It was authority, lived experience, and mastery distilled into presence. The general continued, recounting the events that had earned Riley her legendary call sign. During a mission in Kandahar, he said, her unit was ambushed, pinned down by enemy fire. An explosion destroyed the Humvee carrying 3 of her comrades. Despite being injured herself, Sergeant Riley assessed the situation, prioritized the wounded, and pulled each soldier from the burning vehicle. She maintained order, ensured no one was left behind, and led the team to safety under enemy fire. She endured injuries most would collapse under and emerged with her unit intact. A hush fell over the yard. The story, vivid and raw, painted a picture of courage few could imagine. The recruits, Miller included, listened in awe. Miller's jaw tightened as the shame of his earlier mockery collided with the undeniable truth of Riley's heroism. Every laugh, every insult, every derisive comment he had thrown earlier seemed grotesque in comparison to the reality of her actions. Riley's scars, once mocked, now radiated silent power, their significance fully illuminated by the general's words. Her call sign, Phoenix, Thompson said, represents rebirth through fire. She has risen from destruction, from injury, from impossible odds, time and time again. The scars you see are proof that she survived, that she endured, that she led. To mock her, to judge her based on appearances, is to insult every act of courage, every life saved, every sacrifice made under fire. The recruits were transfixed, their earlier exhaustion replaced by a profound respect, even awe. Miller's hands clenched at his sides. He had spent the morning believing strength was loud, visible, and performative. Yet he now realized that true strength was quiet, enduring, and almost invisible. It was resilience under pressure, courage under fire, and leadership when no one was watching. Riley embodied all of this, and Miller, who had mocked her scars so confidently, could no longer deny the truth. For the first time, he felt the full weight of humility pressing upon him. Riley's eyes swept the yard, calm and unflinching. She did not speak, yet her presence filled every corner of the space. The recruits felt her authority, her mastery, and her quiet command. Miller wanted to speak, to apologize, to acknowledge his mistakes, but no words came. He understood now that words were unnecessary. Respect was earned through observation, understanding, and acknowledgement of truth. Riley did not need to forgive him publicly. Her example alone was enough to teach the lesson he needed. The remaining recruits shifted, the murmurs slowly resuming, this time in low, respectful tones. They shared whispers about Riley's endurance, her heroism, and the precision with which she guided them through the obstacle course. Even the most skeptical recruits found themselves captivated, reflecting on what courage truly meant. Miller's mind raced, imagining himself in the scenario the general had described: the fire, the chaos, the desperation, and he shuddered at how inadequate he would have been. Riley had saved lives while injured, remaining calm and commanding under conditions he could barely fathom. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, the recruits began to file back to the barracks. Riley moved among them, helping silently where needed, adjusting packs, straightening stances, offering guidance without words. Her scars glimmered faintly in the sunset light, a living testament to endurance, sacrifice, and heroism. Miller followed behind, his steps heavy with contemplation, shame, and a grudging admiration he struggled to express. The lessons of the day had left an indelible mark, not just on the recruits' muscles and endurance, but on their understanding of courage and leadership. By nightfall, the camp was quieter than usual. Recruits settled into the barracks, exhausted but reflective. Miller sat alone for a long time, replaying every insult, every mockery, and every display of skill he had witnessed. He realized that he had been wrong, not in one isolated judgment, but in the very assumptions he had built about strength, heroism, and leadership. Riley's call sign Phoenix was not a title handed lightly. It was earned through unimaginable courage and steadfast endurance. The weight of that truth settled over him like a physical presence, reshaping his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. In that quiet moment, Miller understood that mockery and arrogance were powerless in the face of true heroism. He had seen it, lived it for a brief but transformative day, and he could never unsee it. Riley's scars were not marks of failure. They were proof of survival and leadership. Her calm, precise guidance, her silent authority, and her history of heroism had left an imprint on every recruit present. And Miller, humbled and aware of his own shortcomings, began the slow process of internal change, a process that would define the rest of his service. The evening air in the barracks yard was cooler, a soft breeze carrying the faint smell of pine from the nearby forest line. The day's exertion weighed on every recruit, muscles trembling from the obstacle course, throats raw from the harsh commands, and minds buzzing from the revelations of the morning. Sergeant Riley moved among them with quiet authority, checking packs, straightening gear, offering subtle guidance to those struggling under the weight of exhaustion. Her scars, still faintly visible under the dimming light, seemed almost to glow, not as symbols of injury, but as emblems of endurance, leadership, and survival. Miller trailed behind, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a heavy mix of shame, awe, and reluctant admiration. The earlier mocking had evaporated in the presence of Phoenix. Each step he took felt measured, cautious, almost deferential, as though the ground itself demanded acknowledgement of the lessons he had failed to learn before. He watched Riley correct a struggling recruit's posture, her movements precise and deliberate, and realized for the first time that leadership was quiet, patient, and deliberate, not loud, boastful, or performative. A few recruits approached Riley, asking for advice on technique, posture, and pacing through the obstacle course. She offered guidance without condescension, her voice calm and steady, yet every word carried authority. Miller watched silently as the group responded to her corrections, adjusting gear, moving more efficiently, and visibly growing more confident. The lesson was subtle but profound. True leadership did not require intimidation or ego. It required observation, patience, and the ability to inspire action through example. Riley embodied all of this, her presence alone transforming the group's energy. Miller's chest tightened as he replayed the general's words from the morning. Phoenix, a call sign earned through courage, resilience, and the salvation of lives under fire. He had mocked her scars, judged her by appearances, and now the truth left him speechless. For the first time, he felt the weight of humility pressing on him. His previous attempts at humor and dominance seemed almost cruel in retrospect. He wanted to apologize, but words felt insufficient, inadequate to express the depth of his regret. Riley, unaware of his inner struggle, continued her silent guidance. She corrected a recruit's strap, adjusted a helmet, and offered a brief nod to another who had executed a maneuver perfectly. Her actions were efficient, understated, and commanding without needing words. The other recruits followed her lead instinctively, realizing that mockery, brashness, or arrogance had no place in a team functioning under stress. Miller, observing quietly, began to understand that leadership and respect were earned through actions, discipline, and the courage to endure, not through noise or superficial confidence. As night approached, a final exercise was announced, a simulated field operation designed to test cohesion, judgment, and endurance under pressure. Recruits were assigned into small teams, each under Riley's oversight. Miller found himself paired with a mix of eager and exhausted recruits, many of whom looked to Riley for guidance. The expectation was clear. This was not about speed or individual achievement. It was about teamwork, observation, and strategic thinking under duress. Miller felt his stomach tighten, realizing that today's tests extended far beyond physical endurance. Riley moved among the teams, observing silently. When a recruit hesitated, she offered a subtle nudge, a repositioning, a whispered correction, never loud, never commanding. The effect was immediate. The team coordinated, moving with efficiency and confidence. Miller, struggling to keep pace, realized how much he had underestimated the value of observation, patience, and guidance. Riley's calm presence had created cohesion without effort. It was the kind of leadership that could save lives in combat, the kind of skill he had mocked, but now desperately sought to understand. The simulation began, and the teams advanced through the mock field terrain, uneven ground, obstacle barriers, and controlled fire simulations. Recruits communicated quietly, following subtle cues, adjusting for balance, carrying simulated casualties, and maintaining pace. Miller felt himself faltering under the pressure, but Riley's gaze occasionally fell on him, a quiet knowing observation, not a rebuke. Her presence reminded him to focus, to act deliberately, to consider the team above himself. Slowly, almost painfully, Miller began to internalize the lessons he had resisted all morning. Hours passed. Sweat-soaked uniforms, muscles burned, and fatigue threatened to overwhelm the recruits. Yet Riley remained a calm constant, guiding without interference, her scars glinting faintly in the fading light. Her quiet authority inspired confidence, even in the most exhausted recruits. Miller's earlier arrogance had been replaced with a cautious determination to observe, learn, and contribute. He noticed the nuances: when to adjust a teammate's load, when to slow, when to take initiative, and when to follow. These were lessons that could not be taught in manuals. They could only be observed and internalized. During a particularly challenging section of the field exercise, a recruit stumbled under the weight of the pack. Instinctively, Miller moved to correct him, but Riley's subtle hand on his shoulder froze the action. Instead of interference, she allowed the team to adjust naturally, observing their problem-solving in real time. Miller understood instantly. Leadership was not about dominance or intervention at every moment. It was about guidance, observation, and providing space for initiative while maintaining overall cohesion. The realization hit him with a force that left him breathless. By the time the simulation ended, Night had fully descended. The recruits, exhausted yet exhilarated, gathered back in the yard. Sweat, mud, and fatigue marked every uniform, but the air was charged with accomplishment and understanding. Riley moved among the teams, offering brief acknowledgments, subtle nods, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet word of encouragement. The recruits' posture and demeanor had transformed, shaped by the day's lessons in endurance, courage, and leadership. Miller, who had mocked and belittled her earlier, now followed her example silently, internally vowing to rebuild his approach to respect, teamwork, and courage. As the group began to disperse toward the barracks, Miller caught Riley's eye. There was no judgment, no mockery, only a calm acknowledgement that carried the weight of experience. In that silent exchange, Miller recognized the full lesson. Strength was not performative, heroism was not loud, and respect was earned through action, endurance, and integrity. Riley's scars, her calm guidance, and her history as Phoenix were the embodiment of these truths. He felt both humbled and inspired, aware that today had irrevocably changed his perspective. Night settled over the training camp. Recruits prepared for rest, muscles aching, minds heavy with reflection. Miller sat alone, replaying the events of the day, the obstacle course, the field simulation, and above all, the quiet, unwavering presence of Phoenix. He understood now that true leadership was a blend of courage, patience, and silent guidance. The journey from arrogance to understanding had begun, and though it would take time to internalize fully, the seed of respect and transformation had been planted. In that quiet moment, the story of Riley, the scars, the call sign, the quiet heroism resonated deeply. Phoenix was not just a soldier. She was a teacher, a leader, and an example that would shape every recruit present, especially Miller. The evening ended with no fanfare, no speeches, just the lingering presence of a hero whose strength could not be mocked, whose courage had left an indelible mark, and whose guidance would echo in the actions of those who had witnessed it firsthand. The early morning air was crisp, carrying a faint chill that cut through the exhaustion lingering in the barracks. Recruits rose slowly, muscles stiff from the previous day's grueling exercises, but their minds buzzed with the lessons of Phoenix. Sergeant Riley was already awake, moving with her quiet precision, inspecting gear, checking straps, and silently observing the recruits as they assembled. Her scars, faintly visible in the morning light, were a reminder of the battles she had survived, battles Miller could only begin to comprehend. Miller, still shaken by the previous day, approached hesitantly. His pride, once boisterous and unshakable, had been replaced by cautious awareness. He watched Riley guide a younger recruit through the proper way to secure a harness, her hands gentle but firm. For the first time, he understood the difference between mock authority and genuine leadership. Riley did not demand respect. She earned it through action, endurance, and unwavering composure. Each motion, each glance, each adjustment of gear was teaching without a word, and Miller absorbed it all silently. The general had called a morning briefing, signaling that today would test more than physical endurance. It would evaluate teamwork, judgment under pressure, and the recruits' ability to internalize the lessons Phoenix had imparted. The recruits gathered in formation, still weary from yesterday, but the air carried a new energy, one of respect, determination, and a shared understanding of what true courage looked like. Miller stood among them, shoulders tight, trying to internalize the weight of responsibility he had shirked the day before. Today's exercise, General Thompson began, his voice sharp and deliberate, will simulate a combat extraction under high-pressure conditions. You will face obstacles designed to test your ability to adapt, respond, and act as a cohesive unit. Success will not be measured in speed alone. It will be measured in judgment, teamwork, and the ability to maintain composure under stress. Every decision you make could mean success or failure. Observe, learn, and act with intention. The gravity in his voice left no doubt. This would be the defining exercise of the training cycle. Riley's team was first to deploy. She walked among them, her presence calm yet commanding. Every recruit instinctively followed her lead, aware that she would guide without overbearing control. Miller, assigned to her group, felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. He had watched her lead quietly before, but now the stakes were higher. The general's scrutiny, the simulated high-pressure scenario, and the memory of Riley's heroism combined to create a tension that tightened his chest. He knew that his actions would no longer hide behind arrogance. The simulation began. Smoke bombs erupted, obscuring vision. Loud noises mimicked explosions, and the recruits were required to maneuver through uneven terrain while carrying simulated casualties. Riley moved with silent efficiency, assessing the situation, adjusting formations, and guiding the team without speaking more than necessary. Miller struggled at first, his instincts to rush and dominate causing minor mistakes. But Riley's subtle cues, hand signals, shifts in posture, small nods guided him. Slowly, he began to internalize the lesson. Leadership and courage were not loud. They were deliberate, precise, and resilient under pressure. At one point, a simulated casualty became stuck under debris. Panic threatened to spread, and some recruits faltered under stress. Miller's first instinct was to shout instructions, to assert himself, but Riley's calm gaze met his. A small gesture, a tilt of her hand, a shift of weight told him exactly what to do. He moved with deliberate care, helping lift the debris, supporting the recruit, and maintaining team cohesion. Relief washed over him as he realized he could act effectively without ego. He had begun to absorb Phoenix's lessons in real time. The operation continued, each obstacle escalating in difficulty. Muddy trenches, narrow walkways, and simulated fire zones tested physical endurance. Complex decision points forced judgment under stress. Riley remained the constant, a silent anchor guiding her team through chaos. Her scars, a testament to survival and heroism, gleamed faintly under the artificial smoke and flickering light. Recruits followed her cues, growing more confident, more precise, and more aware of the necessity of teamwork and observation. Miller, once consumed by self-interest, now moved with intention, focusing on aiding his comrades and maintaining cohesion. By mid-mission, Miller had begun to feel a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The physical demands were punishing, but the mental and emotional challenges weighed heavier. He caught glimpses of Riley adjusting formations, correcting minor mistakes, and silently evaluating the team. Her presence was unwavering, calm, and authoritative, without needing to dominate. He realized the depth of what he had mocked before. Her scars were not signs of weakness. They were evidence of her resilience, endurance, and experience in situations far beyond what he could imagine. The final phase of the simulation required extracting all team members safely while navigating a narrow ridge under simulated enemy fire. Tension spiked, and recruits hesitated, unsure of balance or how to support one another. Riley's quiet guidance was pivotal. Her subtle corrections and calm assurance enabled the team to move steadily. Miller felt his own confidence grow, rooted not in ego, but in careful observation and application of lessons learned. He realized that true courage was measured in composure, resilience, and the willingness to shoulder responsibility for others. As the team completed the extraction, relief and exhaustion washed over the recruits. They had survived the simulation, but more importantly, they had internalized a crucial lesson. Leadership was earned through action, courage, and endurance, not through noise, mockery, or superficial bravado. Miller's chest heaved, not only from exertion, but from recognition of his own growth. He understood now that every insult he had thrown, every moment of arrogance, had been a failure to recognize real heroism. Phoenix's example had transformed him in ways he had not anticipated. Back in the yard, the recruits gathered to debrief. General Thompson's gaze swept across the team, lingering on Riley and then Miller. "Observe what you have learned," he said. "Leadership, courage, and endurance are tested in action. Sergeant Riley exemplifies these qualities. Let her example guide your decisions, your actions, and your understanding of what it means to be part of a team." His words reinforced what the day's simulation had taught. Respect was earned through deeds, courage, and the ability to act under pressure. Miller, standing near the edge of the group, caught Riley's eye. For the first time, he felt a mixture of humility, admiration, and resolve. The arrogance that had defined him that morning had been replaced by a commitment to learn, to observe, and to act deliberately. Riley's quiet authority, her scars, and the story behind Phoenix had reshaped his understanding of strength, heroism, and leadership. He realized that his journey had only just begun, but he now had a guide whose example was unassailable. As night fell over the training grounds, the recruits retired to the barracks. The air was heavy with reflection. Miller walked behind Riley, not in mockery or ego, but in recognition of her authority and lessons. He replayed the day's events, the obstacle course, the field simulations, the general's revelation, and Riley's quiet guidance. Each moment had chipped away at his arrogance and replaced it with understanding, respect, and a newfound desire to embody the lessons Phoenix had taught without words. In the quiet of the barracks, the echoes of the day lingered. The story of Phoenix, the scars, the courage, the silent heroism had left an indelible mark on every recruit, especially Miller. He knew that he could not undo the mistakes of the past day, but he could honor them by learning, growing, and applying the lessons he had resisted. Riley's presence, her example, and the weight of her experiences would guide him forward, shaping not only his abilities as a soldier, but the character he would carry beyond the training ground. Dawn broke over the training camp, casting long shadows across the yard and painting the gravel and barracks with pale gold. The morning was calm, deceptively serene, as if the world itself had paused to witness what would unfold. The recruits, weary but alert, gathered for the final evaluation, a culmination of endurance, courage, teamwork, and leadership. The events of the past days, the obstacle courses, the simulations, the revelation of Phoenix's heroism had transformed the group. Miller, standing among them, felt the weight of his growth, his earlier arrogance replaced by a cautious humility tempered with determination. Sergeant Riley moved among the recruits, her scars illuminated by the morning light, a living testament to survival, resilience, and leadership. Every step she took radiated calm authority. She inspected gear, adjusted straps, and checked positions with a precision that inspired respect rather than fear. Miller watched closely, trying to absorb every subtle lesson, every gesture, every movement. He remembered the mockery, the arrogance, and the ignorance of the previous week. Now he understood that real strength lay not in loudness or bravado, but in endurance, composure, and the ability to guide others under pressure. General Thompson arrived just as the recruits prepared to begin. His presence, as always, commanded attention without a word. The recruits snapped to attention, their movements precise, disciplined, and unified a stark contrast to the chaos of the first day. Miller, feeling the gravity of the moment, squared his shoulders and tried to embody the lessons Phoenix had instilled. He caught Riley's eye briefly. She nodded subtly, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. It was enough. "Recruits," the general began, voice carrying over the quiet yard, "today is your final evaluation. Your performance will be measured not by speed or individual accomplishment, but by cohesion, judgment, endurance, and the ability to act under extreme stress. Observe the environment, support your team, and execute with precision. Remember the lessons of Sergeant Riley: her courage, her endurance, and the heroism that earned her the call sign Phoenix. Let her example guide your actions. The recruits absorbed every word, every syllable weighted with the gravity of experience. The first stage of the evaluation was a complex obstacle course combining everything they had faced before: high walls, narrow beams, mud pits, rope climbs, and unpredictable terrain. Miller approached with deliberate care, focusing not on speed, but on executing each movement with precision and supporting his teammates. He adjusted gear, lent a hand where necessary, and maintained awareness of the unit's cohesion. For the first time, he felt the balance between individual action and collective responsibility, the core of Phoenix's lessons. As the recruits progressed, unexpected challenges arose. A simulated landslide blocked part of the path, forcing the team to improvise. Miller hesitated briefly, recalling Riley's subtle cues, and then took initiative, directing teammates to stabilize and clear debris safely. His confidence was not loud. It was measured, deliberate, and effective. The other recruits followed, executing maneuvers with a cohesion born from observation and internalized guidance. The exercise was no longer a test of individual superiority. It was a demonstration of teamwork forged under the influence of Phoenix's example. The final section of the evaluation simulated extraction under heavy fire. Smoke, noise, and artificial explosions created chaos, and recruits were required to move strategically while carrying simulated casualties. Panic threatened to spread, but Riley remained calm, moving among the team, offering subtle guidance with gestures, posture, and brief corrections. Miller felt himself acting with precision, responding to stress with awareness rather than impulse. Every lesson absorbed from Phoenix over the past days was now tested under extreme pressure. One critical moment arrived when a recruit, exhausted and unsteady, almost fell under the weight of the pack. Miller reacted instinctively, supporting the teammate while maintaining balance and direction. Riley's brief nod confirmed his correct judgment, and he felt a surge of affirmation, not prideful arrogance, but the quiet satisfaction of competence aligned with Phoenix's example. The team completed the extraction, each member moving cohesively, efficiently, and deliberately, embodying the lessons of endurance, courage, and leadership Phoenix had imparted. Back in the yard, the recruits regrouped, breathing heavily but triumphant. The general's eyes swept across them, pausing briefly on Miller and Riley. "Observe what you have accomplished," he said. "You have executed under stress, demonstrated cohesion, and internalized the lessons of leadership and courage. Sergeant Riley's example, her scars, her call sign, and her heroism guided you. Let her legacy inform every action you take, every decision you make, and every challenge you face." His words reinforced the transformative impact of Phoenix's influence. Miller's gaze found Riley once more. This time he spoke, voice quiet but deliberate. "Sergeant, thank you. I understand now." Riley's lips curved slightly, a subtle acknowledgement rather than praise, and she nodded. In that silent exchange, the weight of Phoenix's legacy was fully felt. Miller understood that respect, courage, and leadership were not to be taken lightly, mocked, or assumed. They were earned through action, endurance, and moral clarity. The remaining recruits, inspired and humbled, gathered around, sharing glances of quiet camaraderie. The day's exercises had transformed not only their physical endurance, but their understanding of teamwork, resilience, and heroism. Miller, once arrogant and mocking, had become reflective, observant, and deliberate, a transformation Phoenix had silently guided. He knew that the lessons of the past days would remain with him long after the training camp, shaping not only his actions as a soldier, but his approach to every challenge in life. As the sun climbed higher, the training grounds quieted. Recruits returned to their duties, but the lessons lingered. Phoenix Sergeant Riley continued her guidance, calm, composed, and steadfast. Her scars, her presence, and her story had left an indelible mark on everyone present. Miller walked among his peers, carrying a new understanding of courage, endurance, and the responsibilities of leadership. He no longer sought recognition or dominance. Instead, he sought competence, observation, and integrity. In the quiet of the barracks, Miller reflected on the journey. The early arrogance, the mockery, and the ignorance had given way to respect, understanding, and a desire to grow. Phoenix's example had reshaped his perspective. Leadership was quiet but firm. Heroism was earned through endurance and sacrifice. And scars, visible or invisible, were symbols of experience, survival, and courage. He had witnessed, learned, and absorbed the essence of what it meant to be a soldier, a teammate, and a leader. That evening, as the camp settled into night, Miller stood near the edge of the yard, watching Riley oversee the remaining tasks. He felt a profound gratitude for the lessons she had imparted silently through her actions. The transformation within him was no longer theoretical. It was evident in his awareness, his decisions, and his interactions with fellow recruits. Phoenix had not only survived fire and trauma, she had ignited growth, respect, and understanding in others. Her legacy would endure far beyond her own experiences, shaping every recruit fortunate enough to witness her strength. As the camp lights dimmed, Miller silently vowed to honor the lessons Phoenix had taught. He would carry the understanding of courage, endurance, and leadership forward, not through arrogance, mockery, or superficial bravado, but through deliberate action, humility, and resilience. Sergeant Riley's scars were no longer marks of injury. They were proof of survival, courage, and guidance. And in the quiet aftermath of trials, simulations, and revelation, Miller finally understood the true weight of the call sign Phoenix, rising from fire, enduring through adversity, and inspiring others through example. The training camp, once a place of competition and ego, had been transformed by Phoenix's presence. The recruits had been tested, humbled, and educated in ways no manual or lecture could achieve. Miller, forever changed, walked among them with a newfound understanding. Respect, courage, and leadership were no longer abstract concepts. They were alive, present, and embodied in Sergeant Riley, the Phoenix whose legacy would guide every step, every decision, and every action in the days, years, and challenges to come.